Hello and welcome. My name is Diana Franganillo and I am the Director of In-Vehicle User Experience Research at Strategy Analytics, which is now part of Tech Insights. Do you know how radio and streaming usage have evolved over the last 10 years in the vehicle? And do you know what are the trends impacting this evolution? So these two topics will be covered in the next 10 minutes in this presentation. We know that car journeys are where much of radio listening originates. Radio is easy. You don't need to think of what you feel like listening to get it going. Radio is community, companionship. It is news from local to global and much more. But we know that online content such as streaming music and podcasts have been following up on the heels of radio. The last 2 years with COVID-19 and its related lockdowns have impacted severely the number of commutes. However, two different reactions were observed in the West. Whilst in the States, it seems that people got used to tune into local radios to feel more connected to the community and to get the latest news and trustworthy news on COVID-19. In Europe, we observed the opposite situation. It seems that people got more used to streaming at home and that they took this experience with them when they jump into the car. So has this change of habits consolidated? Now we are in the new normal? Or have we reverted back to the way it used to be before the pandemic? We at the Strategy Analytics believe that there is still a very specific need for broadcast radio and that the streaming services are complementary and for other types of journey and circumstances. However, we believe that it is really important that the stakeholders are very aware about this tension between radio and streaming, or these competitions, as others should say, to be able to help radio to remain relevant for many years to come. So how has radio and streaming usage evolved over the last 10 years? We at Strategy Analytics have been conducting a survey for a number of years about the usage of the different infotainment sources whilst in the car. Back in 2012, over 70% of drivers listening to the radio whilst in the car on a daily basis, whilst only 5% listen to online content. This made a difference of roughly 70 percentage points. Fast forward to 2019, just before the pandemic hit, that difference reduced to 20 percentage points, with still half of the people listening to the radio whilst in the car on a daily basis. 2 years later, way into the pandemic, at the worst of the pandemic actually, this difference reduced to 5 percentage points, with roughly a third of the people listening to the radio on a daily basis when they jump into the car. The good news is that radio has bounced back. Now we seem to have got into the new normality, into the new normal situation. I know this 10 years view might not look very optimistic, but what I can see is that there is not a dominant source. The streaming is not dominating. What we can see is that people want choices. People still want radio. So radio isn't disappearing. It's a vital option in the car. So we just need to keep on strengthening its value proposition and thus its position in the dash. But let's have a look at another aspect. We know that radio trends middle age and that the streaming trends younger, but let's see to what extent. Let's see how the percentage of overall daily listeners compare to the percentage of those listeners that are under 25. So we can see, as anticipated, that those under 25 are less interested in radio than the older generations. And the other way around happens with streaming when we compare the overall percentage of listeners with those listeners under 25. But why this analysis? So why is this important? This graph shows the evolution of the European population all the way back from 2005 through 2020 and the projection out to 2100. Nowadays, most car buyers are Gen X's and baby boomers, followed by millennials. But it should be noted that all baby boomers will be 65, older, or deceased by 2030. So although Gen Z makes up a minority in terms of car buyers, the main reason why the in-vehicle radio usage might not be of top concern to radio stakeholders, soon they will become more relevant. Besides this data about how much people listening to the different sources within the vehicle, we at the Strategy Analytics have different hypotheses to test as well. One of our hypotheses, based on some exploratory work, is that people listen to the radio more than streaming first thing in the morning when they go to work, because they don't want to think of what they fancy listening and they want to get the latest news. So that turned out to be the case, but the difference was less significant than we expected. The second hypothesis we tested was that we believed that radio was more of a leisurely thing, while streaming was more suited to the working mentality, right? That turned out to be the case. And the other thing we tested, another hypothesis we tested, is whether people was, driving solo or with other people, accompanied by other people in the vehicle, when they listen to the radio and streaming. And it turned out that radio was more of a solo listening experience, which makes sense because radio is companionship and it makes you feel connected to the community. So now let's move on to trends impacting media consumption. First, it's inevitable to mention DAB+, which has become the standard in Europe. From December 2020, every vehicle fitted with a radio tuner produced within the European Union needs to include DAB+, so basically digital terrestrial radio capability. This brings more choices to the user, brings as well a better sound quality and also richer metadata, which is enhancing the overall radio listening experience. Secondly, I would like to mention the fact that the vehicles have now larger screen. So OEMs have larger canvases to make compelling experiences, which is not always taken advantage of. But they interpret these canvases, they use these canvases in different ways. So some OEMs include radio under the umbrella of media as another app. And whilst other OEMs make of radio kind of like a different and very distinctive feature, not under the umbrella of media. They both have pros and cons, but what we strongly recommend at the Strategy Analytics is provide the users with the ability to easily select the media source they want to listen, but also with the ability to switch across them very easily as well. Another trend that cannot be ignored is the ubiquity of Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, and the penetration of Android Automotive operating systems with Google Automotive Services. Currently, both mirroring systems don't include radio capability. So if the driver wants to listen to the radio whilst they are using these systems, they need to get out of the system and jump into the embedded system. So basically, it's not a seamless transition. It seems that next year, the next implementation of Apple CarPlay is going to include radio capability. We will need to wait and see. But then we have to mention as well Android Automotive operating system, which might make radio another app in the dash. So there is the risk that it gets a little bit lost for the driver to use. The next trend I will mention is the ubiquity of voice interactions. If well implemented, they could be less distracting than manual visual interactions. This could be used not only to allow the easy switch that I mentioned before between and across the different media sources, but it could allow as well to monetize the vehicle experience. And the last trend, of course, to be prepared for is the advent of the autonomous vehicles. So at some point, the competition will no longer be between radio and streaming. At some point, the competition will include gaming, video streaming, productivity tools as well, and also relaxation tools, because at some point, what you might want is just to rest whilst the vehicle is driving you from A to B. Let me recap the previous content. So radio is still royalty. There is still a clear and very specific need for broadcast radio. Whilst it is true that the time spent listening to streaming sources has increased, these services are complementary to radio, and they are useful in different circumstances and for different types of journey. So what we can do? We should cater content for the youngsters, not only to focus the content for the prime car buying segments. We should aim for a synergetic approach rather than a competition for a better and holistic experience for the end user. And this will include what I mentioned before, this easy transition across media sources, or better said, across linear and non-linear content. And lastly, we should get ready for the advent of autonomous vehicles because they will bring with them other compelling experiences. Let's keep on working together to maintain radio as the queen of the dashboard and strong for many more years to come. Thank you very much.